What's up guys, welcome back to the channel. In today's video, once again, we have a top 10 list. This time ranking the top 10 toughest championship runs in NBA history. And when talking about championship runs and level of competition, it's always a big time discussion. And for me personally, the level of competition a player faces or a team faces definitely can elevate that player as well as that team into all-time great status. Now when I did this top 10 list, I ranked the overall body of work of how difficult the year was, and I didn't focus on one specific round of the playoffs. For example, I didn't focus on how difficult the finals were. I focused on how difficult the overall path for the entire championship run. Now before I get into this video, if you hadn't already subscribed, make sure to do so, and if you could like this video, I would greatly appreciate it. So with that out of the way, let's get into the video. At number 10, I have the 2014 Spurs, and this Spurs team was coming off a very disappointing 2013 season where they choked away the championship to the Miami Heat. Now, most teams in NBA history would not have the mental toughness of this Spurs team to come back the following year and run the table. This Spurs team in 2014 only lost 20 games and had the best record in the NBA. And when it came to the playoffs, they faced some tough competition. In the first round, they played the 49-win Mavericks, who had Dirk Nowitzki, Vince Carter, and Monte Ellis. In the second round, they played the 54-win Blazers, who had the duo of Dame Lillard and LaMarcus Aldridge. In the Western Conference Finals, they played the Oklahoma City Thunder, who won 59 games. In the NBA Finals, once again, they were matched up against the Miami Heat, who won 54 games. And that 2014 Finals series was an absolute blowout. The Spurs won in 5 games, and they blew out the Heat in virtually every game. Now, the level of dedication and motivation you have to come back from a devastating loss in 2013 and run the table in 2014, that is a unique thing not only in NBA history, but also in the history of sports. Most teams will be mentally fractured and they could not pick up the pieces. This Spurs team was the exact opposite. They had great mental toughness, they were extremely motivated, they played team basketball, and in the end, they got the revenge. And this Spurs team was the perfect blend of the old Spurs combined with the new Spurs. Tim Duncan was 37 years old, Manu was 36, you had Kawhi Leonard who was 22, and also Tony Parker and Boris Diaw who were both 31. So all in all, this Spurs team faced some tremendous adversity, and they overcame all of that to win the championship, and that's why I have them ranked at the number 10 spot. Now looking ahead at number 9, we have the 2002 Lakers. And this Lakers team had already won 2 championships, both back-to-back, and they were on a quest to complete the epic three-peat. And probably the hardest thing you can do in the NBA as a team is win 3 straight championships. The level of fatigue and strain you have from being the champion night in and night out is a tremendous burden, and this Lakers team definitely felt that during the 2002 season. They still had the 3rd best record in the West, but Shaq, as well as a lot of other players, were dealing with tons of injuries and they were just banged up in general. Now, like most of the Lakers' title runs, they faced some tough competition. In the first round, they faced the 49-win Blazers. The second round, the 58-win Spurs. The Western Conference Finals, the 61-win Kings, who took them to 7 games. And in the finals, the 52-win Nets. And the early 2000s West was one of the toughest conferences in NBA history, and that Lakers team for a 3rd time made it back to the NBA Finals and won the championship. And the main adversity this Lakers team faced was in the Western Conference Finals versus that Kings team. They were actually down 3-2 to the Kings, but over the rest of the postseason, they would not lose a single game, winning the last 2 games of that series and winning the next 4 games versus the Nets. And Kobe in those games averaged 28 points per game, 7.3 boards, 5.5 assists on 48, 57, and 84 splits. Shaq averaged a ridiculous 36.8 points per game, 13.2 boards, 2.8 blocks on 57% shooting. So this Lakers team overcame the tough Western Conference, and they overcame the fatigue and the mental drain of being a 3-time NBA champion. And that's why I have them at the number 9 spot. Now at number 8, I have the 1969 Boston Celtics. And this Celtics team had won multiple championships in a row, and this year was the last year for Bill Russell as well as Sam Jones, 2 integral pieces of that Celtics dynasty. And Bill Russell at this time was actually the player coach, which was another added burden on his plate. And you could definitely see the age and the fatigue showing for the Celtics team, as they only won 48 games, the lowest win total for a single season during the 1960s. And they weren't the dominant team of old, finishing 4th in the Eastern Conference, which at that time was the lowest possible playoff seed. So heading into the playoffs, the Celtics were definitely the underdogs in the first round, as they played the 55-win 76ers, who had Billy Cunningham and Hal Greer, 2 Hall of Famers. In the second round, they faced the 54-win Knicks, who had Willis Reed, Walt Frazier, as well as David Busher. In the NBA Finals, they played the heavy favorites, the Los Angeles Lakers, that had Jerry West, Wilt Chamberlain, and Elgin Baylor. And that final series was an epic 7-game series battle that in the end, the Celtics would come out on top, and Bill Russell and Sam Jones would win a championship in their last ever games. And this Celtics team in general was a very, very old and veteran team, and they won that game off grit and experience, as they are the third oldest championship team in NBA history, with their average player age being a little bit over 30 years old. And I think the competition they faced in all 3 rounds was definitely some really great teams, and they were the underdog in all 3 of those playoff series. So Boston definitely overcame the odds, despite Bill Russell and Sam Jones being their last years and being the oldest team in the NBA. And that's why I have them ranked at the number 8 spot. So next up at number 7, I have the 2009 Lakers. And this Lakers team was coming off a finals appearance in 2008, and they really came back with a lot of motivation to make it back to the finals, and this time win the championship. And this was the first full year of the Pau Gasol and Kobe Bryant duo, and together they won 65 games, the most in the NBA. And very similar to the early 2000s West, the late 2000s West was just as difficult. This Lakers team, as you can see, faced some really tough competition. In the first round, the 48-win Jazz. The second round, the 53-win Rockets. The Western Conference Finals, the 54-win Nuggets. And in the finals, the 59-win Magic. And all those teams they faced had a very unique style of basketball, and they were just very unique teams in general. That Jazz team had Deron Williams, Carlos Boozer, and Paul Millsap. The Rockets took them to 7 games. The Nuggets had Carmelo, Chauncey Billups, and J.R. Smith. And that Orlando Magic team was really ahead of their time with Dwight Howard, Hedo Turkoglu, and Rashard Lewis, and just a very, very solid supporting cast. And I think why this championship really stands out to me is because the immediate pressure Kobe Bryant faced at this time was that he had to win a championship without Shaq. In this 2009 season, there was a lot of pressure riding on him and this Lakers team in general. And a lot of people at this time were rooting for Kobe to fail and go up in flames. So taking all that into account, that's why I ranked this championship run at the number 7 spot. Now at the number 6 spot, I have the 97 Chicago Bulls. And this Bulls team had the big 3 of Michael Jordan, Dennis Rodman, as well as Scottie Pippen, and they were coming off a miraculous 96 season where they won 72 games and won the championship. So in 97, the expectations were definitely high, and this Bulls team once again had an outstanding record, going 69-13. Now when you look to the competition they faced in the Eastern Conference, it was some pretty stiff competition. You had the 44-38 Bullets, who had Chris Webber, Rod Strickland, and Juwan Howard, the 56-win Hawks, who had Steve Smith, Mutombo, as well as Mookie Blaylock, and in the Eastern Conference Finals, the 61-win Heat, who had Tim Hardaway, Alonzo Mourning, as well as Jamal Mashburn. And in the finals, they faced the veteran Utah Jazz team, who won 64 games, with the big 3 of John Stockton, Karl Malone, and Jeff Hornacek. And looking at that overall playoff run, that's some pretty deep competition, and actually this Bulls team is one of only 3 teams ever to beat 3 55-win teams en route to a championship. Also, they had the second highest percentage for opponent win percentage at 68.6. That takes into account the Bulls' opponent's overall record. And when looking at SRS, the overall measure of how tough a team is, this Bulls team's opponents ranked 3rd at 20.8. And this Bulls team is top 3 in both those categories, one of only 2 teams ever to accomplish that. And the last thing I'll say about this 97 Bulls team is that Michael Jordan's supporting cast averaged 61.5 points per game. That is the second lowest average for a championship team in NBA history. So overall, this Bulls team was a dominant team. In the playoffs, they played some great competition. Look to the NBA Finals and how close that series was. It took a game winner from Jordan in Game 1, a clutch performance with the flu game, and Steve Kerr hitting the game winner in Game 6. That was a back and forth series that the Bulls narrowly won, and they overcame a very tough Eastern Conference, as well as a very tough Utah Jazz team. That's why I ranked them at the number 6 spot. Now getting into the top 5, the first team I have is the 2010 Lakers. And this Lakers team was already coming off a championship in 2009, and they were a very, very experienced team. But with that experience and those deep championship runs comes a lot of fatigue and a lot of injury. This Lakers team won 57 games and had the best record in the Western Conference, but they definitely were banged up and they were very fatigued heading into the playoffs. And I'll keep repeating this, the 2000s West and the early 2010s West is arguably the toughest conference in NBA history, and the 2010s West in particular was a grind of a conference. You had 8 50-win teams in this conference, and the 42-win Rockets missed the playoffs. And the Oklahoma City Thunder, who won 50 games, were an 8th seed in this conference. Now in the first round, this Lakers team would face off against that Thunder team, and they would win that series pretty handily, beating Kevin Durant, Russell Westbrook, and James Harden. In the second round, they beat the 53-win Jazz, who had Deron Williams, Carlos Boozer, and Paul Millsap. In the Western Conference Finals, they beat the 54-win Suns, who had Steve Nash, Amar Stoudemire, and Jason Richardson. In the NBA Finals, this Lakers team would face off against the 50-win Celtics, who had Paul Pierce, Kevin Garnett, Ray Allen, and Rajon Rondo. And that final series was a grinded-out defensive series, and it went 7 games, with the Lakers narrowly beating the Celtics in that Game 7. And I think winning that championship for that Lakers team, as well as for Kobe, solidified them as one of the best teams of the decade. And for Kobe in particular, it solidified himself as one of the greats in NBA history, winning 5 championships, 2 of those being without Shaq. Now looking at the competition they faced in general, they beat 4 50-win teams en route to the championship, becoming one of only 3 teams ever to do so. And just the extra added motivation for this Lakers team of putting the Boston Celtics, their bitter rivals, who they had lost to in a previous final series, that is the cherry on top for this Lakers team, in my mind, solidifying that run as a top 5 toughest run in NBA history. Now at the number 4 spot, I have one of the more underrated difficult playoff runs, and that is the 93 Chicago Bulls. And this Bulls team was coming off 2 championships in 91 as well as 92, and they were looking for the epic three-peat in 93. And winning 3 titles in a row is already a tall task. When you add on the fatigue this Bulls team had, specifically the 2 stars in Jordan and Pippen, who had both played in the Olympics the previous year, that was just added fatigue and added mental strain. And Chicago only won 57 games, the lowest for any title season in their history, and they finished as the second best team in the Eastern Conference. Now when it came to the playoffs, in the first round they played the 43-win Hawks, who had Dominique Wilkins, Kevin Willis, and Mookie Blaylock. In the second round they played the 54-win Cavs, who had Mark Price, Brad Daugherty, and Larry Nance. And in the Eastern Conference Finals, they played the bitter rival New York Knicks, who had Patrick Ewing, John Starks, Charles Oakley, and a lot of other big-time bruisers. In the NBA Finals, they played the 62-win Suns, with the best record in the NBA, led by Charles Barkley, Kevin Johnson, and Dan Marley. So off the bat, looking at that list, that is a very tough championship run, especially tough for a team trying to win 3 straight championships. And this championship run did not come without its difficulties. The Bulls actually went down 0-2 to the Knicks in the Eastern Conference Finals series, but they would win 4 games straight, and in the finals they would also beat the Suns in 6 games. And Jordan's performance after going down 0-2 was a god-level run, averaging 37 points per game, 7.7 boards, 7.4 assists on 48, 43, and 79 splits, and he absolutely took over and willed this Bulls team to a championship. And the last thing I'll say about this Bulls team is that if you look at the players they faced individually are some of the best players of the 90s. 5 out of the 10 players they faced finished top 10 MVP voting. That is half of the best players in the league that Jordan and his Bulls team beat in that 93 run. So I think combine that with the fact the Bulls were looking for a three-peat and they were facing tremendous adversity, that makes this run the 4th toughest in NBA history. Now getting to the top 3, the first championship run I have is the 94 Rockets. This 94 Rockets team, by most standards, was not an all-time great team, and they really were a team centered around one player, that being Hakeem Olajuwon. Hakeem this year was the MVP, as well as the Defensive Player of the Year, and everything on this Rockets team was centered around him. Now despite that heavy burden, Hakeem led this Rockets team to 58 wins, the second best in the Western Conference. And that 90s West was a tough conference. In the first round, they played the 47-win Blazers, led by Clyde Drexler, as well as Rod Strickland and Cliff Robinson. In the second round, they played the 56-win Suns, who had been to the finals the previous year. And in the Western Conference Finals, they played the 53-win Jazz, led by Karl Malone, as well as John Stockton and Jeff Hornacek. All 3 of those teams were very experienced and very deep teams. And in the finals, they played their best competition yet, the 57-win Knicks, led by Patrick Ewing, John Starks, as well as Charles Oakley. And that series would go 7 games, with the Rockets narrowly beating the Knicks in that Game 7. Now, like I said before, this Rockets team was not a really all-time great team by any standards, but they had one all-time great player, that being Hakeem Olajuwon, and Hakeem during this run had a legendary stretch, leading the Rockets in points, rebounds, assists, as well as blocks and steals. And he was the engine as well as the wheels for this Rockets team, and they would not have been able to win that championship hadn't it been for Hakeem Olajuwon. So I think the 94 Rockets is one of the greatest carry jobs of all time, and I think it's one of the toughest championships ever, personally for Hakeem, as well as this Rockets team in general, and that's why I ranked it at the number 3 spot. Now next up, number 2, we have the 2011 Mavericks, who are in my opinion the biggest overachievers in NBA history. This Mavericks team, much like the 94 Rockets, they really were not an all-time great team, they were a very good team, but they caught fire at the right time. This Mavericks team featured Dirk, who at this time was a veteran player, a very smart player, who was a very experienced playoff performer. But back in 2011, nobody saw Dirk Nowitzki as a centerpiece of a championship team, and actually at this point, he was looked at as a playoff choker due to some past playoff failures. Also on this team, you had Jason Terry, who was on the back end of his career. You had Jason Kidd, who was 37 years old, and Tyson Chandler, who had been on 3 teams in 3 years. So a very, very unique team with a very unique skill set. And this Mavs team won 57 games in the tough Western Conference, and they were the 3rd seed. Now in the first round, they beat the 48-win Blazers, who were a very, very tough team, led by LaMarcus Aldridge. In the second round, they beat the defending champion Lakers with Kobe, Lamar Odom, Pau Gasol, as well as Andrew Bynum. In the Western Conference Finals, they beat the young Thunder with KD, Russ, and Harden. And in the finals, they beat the heavy favorite Miami Heat, who had the big 3 LeBron, D. Wade, and Chris Bosh. So looking at this run in its totality, the Mavericks beat the defending champions, they beat the team of the future, that was the OKC Thunder, and they beat the team of the present, which was the Miami Heat. So in this run, they took down some all-time great players, as well as some all-time great teams. And Dirk during the 2011 playoffs was on an absolute tear from the best basketball of his career. And it was really exciting to watch this Mavericks team upsetting their way through the playoffs, surprisingly to me, becoming the 2nd oldest team ever to win a championship. So that is why I ranked this 2011 Mavs run the 2nd toughest championship run in NBA history. Now at the number 1 spot, for the toughest championship run ever, I have the 1995 Houston Rockets. And I put them at number 1 for a couple of reasons. They were coming off a championship in 94, and entering this year, they had a huge championship hangover, and they were a very mediocre team who made a blockbuster trade for Clyde Drexler that was not well received in the Rockets locker room. And at their best, they were an average 47-win team with a 6th best record in the Western Conference. So that very disappointing start to the year set up the greatest ever championship run, as in the playoffs, this Rockets team would beat 4 55-win teams, including 2 60-win teams. And out of all those 4 teams, those are the 4 best teams in the NBA going off records, and those teams had some all-time great players like John Stockton, Karl Malone, Charles Barkley, Kevin Johnson, David Robinson, even the young duo of Shaq and Penny. The Rockets beat all those teams, and they ran the gauntlet, and they actually came back from a couple of deficits, one of those being a 3-1 comeback versus the Suns, and a 2-1 comeback versus the Jazz in the first round in a best-of-5 series. So the teams they faced in the level of competition was at an all-time high, and to put it very simply, it's a notch above every other team on this list, and it stands out in my mind as the toughest championship run in NBA history. So that right there is my entire list of the top 10 toughest championship runs in NBA history. Of course, there's only 10 on this list, and there are much more great championship runs that I simply could not fit on. So as always, thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. I'll see you guys next time.